Thanks for spending your Friday evening with us. My name is Chris Klimek. I'm a film critic for NPR and the Washington City paper. Tonight I have the great honor of introducing our guest, an elite skier and mountaineer, New York Times bestselling author, and of course Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker, Jimmy Chin.
That looks like a knee injury.
Yes. Well, you're a lifelong athlete. I should ask you what your best injury story is, or surgery story is, too.
Not that many, but that didn't happen skiing, though, did it?
That's from running, but yeah, not.
Did you say rugby?
No, running. Just over time. But nothing historic, nothing at altitude, no records broken. Just
make a good story.
I should really try to exaggerate. So I'm going to ask Jimmy a couple questions, and then we're going to open it up to you all. So please have your questions ready. I want to start by asking you, one of the things that's so moving to me about this film is that this is really a love story, right, between Doug and Chris. That starts. You started in the 60s with Doug and Yvonne and their first trip to Patagonia and all that. So I guess my question is really about resource management for you as a documentarian, not in the ecological sense, but just you're going to tell a story that unfolds across decades. You're going to use a mix of archival footage and new footage that you're going to shoot yourself and interviews that you're going to shoot. And so tell us about that process of figuring out what's available and useful to you already versus what you're going to have to shoot. Because it seems like you could get lost in the research phase there and just never make a film. So how does that work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Chris, thank you for coming out and doing this. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming out. It's awesome to see a full theater. You all are some of the first people to see this film in the public theatrical release. Really, last night in New York and DC and tonight are the first, screenings. So that's always exciting as a filmmaker. So thank you. But back to your question, I would say I'm very fortunate to have really good archival producers who, and we have like some crazy echo here, but a very kind of relentless ethos around research and making sure that we kind of, go through everything that we can possibly find. Because one thing for us that, the things that keep us up at night are this idea that we missed something. Because it's still nonfiction, it's still journalism. You still have to do all your homework, due diligence. And so, we scoured everything. Patagonia gave us all their archives. We had archival producers looking for, regional news clips and stories from the 90s in southern Chile. It's like, we looked at really everything possible, and thousands of photos as well. But then it just comes down to the story and what story you're going to tell, and from what point of view. And that was really challenging with this film, because there were so many incredible stories that you could make a doc on Yvonne Chouinard. There's just, and it covers so much time too. But like a lot of docs that we've made, you dive into it wholeheartedly. You trust that the story will reveal itself, and and sometimes it doesn't really become clear until you're fully in the edit. So this is one of those ones.
I think commit and then figure it out is the
Exactly.
thing that's Yvonne describes that to Doug Tompkins, right? He says that's Doug's
Yes,
philosophy.
and
That
then
sounds like
Rick told me that when I was in my 20s, 'cause Rick invited me on my first National Geographic
this is
expedition.
Rick Ridgway, who you saw. In
Yeah.
the film.
And, these are all adventures that I knew of long before I met them, because I read about them, they were all pioneers in the climbing world. And of course, they had many chapters in their lives that became pioneers as entrepreneurs and pioneers in the conservation world, but I knew them originally as climbers and adventurers. And Rick Ridgway invited me on my first National Geographic expedition in 2002 and taught me how to film. It was like, this is how you shoot a scene, this is how so I had some pretty deep roots with Rick, and he's the one that introduced me to Yvonne 20 years ago, and then those two introduced me to Chris and Doug.
So that's another question that I have. You've made a few films about your friends and colleagues at this point. I mean, certainly, Rick Ridgway is someone who he was heavily involved in you becoming a documentarian, right? And
Yeah.
sort of transitioning
Exactly.
from an athlete to, and of course, you made Free Solo about Alex Honnold, who you were close with him prior to making a film
Yeah.
about him, right? Does that change the way you approach your work at all? When your subject is someone who you are close with emotionally?
Yeah, well, and then Meru, our first film was definitely but someone's seen it. But they're all very personal films for me. The Rescue, which we put out last year, I didn't know them, but the other, let's say, Meru, Free Solo, and The Wildlife, these are all stories, films about people that I knew. And really that points to kind of how I first started as a photographer or a visual storyteller, I would say. Like, I had picked up a camera when I was living in Yosemite, and I started taking pictures of my friends who ended up becoming kind of some of the great climbers of our generation. But it was always because I felt compelled to take these photos and share what they were doing, because I was so inspired by them, not just in what they did, but who they were. And then climbing and photography became kind of a vehicle for me to see the world, but that obviously evolved into becoming a filmmaker. But that idea of, I have to feel really compelled to tell a story, especially making a feature doc, just because it's so painful and it takes so long, and you bleed for it. And my wife and I are the type of people who are kind of exhaustive and relentless about our process, and we won't stop until we feel like it's perfect, because we're totally crazy people. But so we have to really be inspired, and I'm grateful that there are people in my life that I'm inspired by, and I mean across any sphere of or any kind of genre or world, like Iman Jannard and Chris Tompkins, Doug. I mean, they really were so inspiring, and I hope that comes across. I mean, Chris Tompkins is just amazing, and so is Ivan. Now, the issue, of course, if as a journalist or as a nonfiction filmmaker, is how do you kind of keep a balanced view of it, and that is definitely part of my partnership with Chai. We come from totally different worlds. Like, she's born and raised in Manhattan, very much a New Yorker, very, very, very smart. I grew up in Minnesota, but I spent most of my 20s being a dirtbag, climbing bum, and ski bum, And
I was going to ask you for a working definition of dirtbag climber.
Well, it's funny because we had dinner with Melinda and Yvonne a few nights ago for the New York premiere, and and I was like, so, did you guys call each other? Did you guys call yourselves dirtbags even then? And she said, absolutely. It was all about being a dirtbag because the more dirtbag you were, the more committed you were to the lifestyle. And I was like, that's exactly what we used to say about living in Yosemite. I mean, it was all about being a dirtbag because the more dirtbag you were, the more of a devotee you were to the religion of climbing. You know, I mean, it's all part of the culture and ethos, but just about Chai and I mean, she is the one that brings this totally different perspective and objectivity to it. She knew Yvonne and Rick and Chris, but she was definitely kind of outside of that community. It's much like in Free Solo, she could care less about the climbing. She literally was like, yeah, whatever, the soloing stuff. I mean, you know, she was much more interested in Alex's kind of emotional journey and the arc of being someone who was more afraid of falling in love than climbing El Cap. Right?
Okay, so you've seen Free Solo, or many of you, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's one of the things that really sticks with me about that film is when you get into talking with Alex's partner, and she's saying, he's not the only person who suffers if he falls and dies.
Yeah.
He needs to realize this.
So yes, Chai is the one that kind of helps balance out because there are pros and cons of being that close. Like you have the access, and honestly, they were very, very private people. They had public personas because they were founders of companies, and she was the CEO. But like in their private lives, they were very, very private. And they're of that generation where it's like, say less, do more, walk the walk, don't talk the talk. Like they're, just very private. So I had the access, but it's also, to tell a balanced story, it still needs objectivity.
Well, and you open with this incredibly intimate moment with Chris, where I infer that she's writing her journal after Doug has died. Right, and was that difficult to get her to trust you that much, to be that open?
Yeah, it was. I mean, if you ask her and they said, "How did you end up making a film with Jimmy?" She said the other night at the MoMA premiere Q&A, she said, "He just started showing up, filming, and." It's true. I kind of started showing up and started filming and being like, "Hey, Chris, can we, And I kind of worked my way in, and before she knew it, like I was kind of filming more and more and more. But it was funny because Alex actually went down to Chile for some event and ended up hanging out with her. And she asked him, she's like, "Well, what was it like working with Jimmy and Chai?" And he just said, because he's Alex, he's like, "Well, once I decided, I just, let them do their job. They're the filmmakers, they're supposed to know what to do. And so I just trusted that they were going to do it, and I was going to climb." And she was, which is super Alex, like, that's totally Alex. But she took that to heart. She was like, "Okay, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to go for it." And then Melinda Chenard was a slightly different story, but Chris totally committed. And she was like, "What do you want?" We were like, "The diaries." And of course, there's some hesitation, and she was like, "They're already kidding me." She's basically like, "Okay, here you go."
There's one in the movie. I think you're allowed one. Chris says it once.
Before it goes hard, you get one. Two.
Just in case no one in the audience is planning to ask you, I want to, as someone who makes films with their spouse, and not just that, but makes documentary films, where, as you said, you can really fall down a rabbit hole. There's no script, so how do you know when you're done? And also, your creative partner, your business partner in this venture is also your life partner.
Yeah, what would you say to anyone who might be contemplating such a project, whether it's,
I mean, it is not easy, I will say that, and she will agree. And yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, there's a lot of pressure. It's the pressure of you're making films. We have a lot of film projects right now. And you're raising kids. And it's, I don't know, I mean, we're really busy. And I've traveled a lot. And, I mean, honestly, filmmaking is only I'm only moonlighting. As a filmmaker, I'm still full-time professional athlete, so it's tricky to jump between New York and Wyoming and Yosemite or wherever it may be. But there is something about how we work and what we bring to the table, because, like I said before, it's just having completely different worldviews and points, perspectives that allow us to make the films that we make. And in a lot of ways, I feel like we cover each other's blind spots, and we have very different interests, and we have different roles. I'm much more present for the physical production, the actual filming, shooting, and Chai is kind of the mastermind in the edit and the structure, and she's the one that what she calls, she breaks the film. She constantly breaks the film and puts it back together, and that's part of her process. And the results are often very unexpected for me. She comes up with things that I would never come up with in terms of how to structure the film. And that's just kind of our synergy and our strength.
So we have time for a few questions. So if you have a mountaineering question or a documentary film question, yes, ma'am, in the red.
Like the two hands. I'm sorry, I'm so excited. I'm gonna maybe have a mild meltdown. So because I have severe ADHD, so I have to say, during these entire pandemic, documentaries have been my hyper focus. So thank you, Jimmy, because I focused on a lot of yours. And I have a gajillion questions, but my biggest, realistically, right, Meru's my comfort documentary, right? That and Continent 7 is what I watch, when I need my comfort.
What's the other one?
Continent 7, which is a
I've
docu-series on Antarctica, which is phenomenal. But I loved Meru, and so I just want to know, I've loved all of yours, but what's next for you as an athlete yourself, right? What's your next adventure that you're also filming for us to participate in?
Marcus, it's not announced, right? Our partners from National Geographic. I'll say we have 5 feature films in production right now, 2 series.
So what's your most, because also Edge of the Unknown was just...
Well, thank you.
I can't
I'm glad you watched that.
So what's your next most exciting feature then? Since you can't tell me what's your next adventure.
I can't remember what's been announced and what hasn't been announced, but I will say we did today Picture Lock, our first narrative feature, which is coming out this fall, and it's about Diana Nyad, the longest swimmerist here from Cuba, Florida. She's the greatest all-time marathon open ocean swimmer in her 20s, and she tried to swim from Cuba to Florida when she was 28. She failed. She retired for 30 years, turns 60, decides that she's not done, and goes for it. 4 more attempts. Anyways, it's a pretty wild story, and Annette Bening plays Diana, and Jodie Foster plays her best friend, and it's this kind of really wild movie, and we spent 5 months filming last year, and that's kind of creatively, that's my
So that's
next.
a movie, not even a documentary.
Yeah, although we'll always make documentaries,
Right, but that's
we love
amazing.
documentaries, but we are kind of, moving in that direction, which is creatively and just where I am in my career that was really interesting and will be very interesting as we kind of delve into scripted features, but that's a climbing a different mountain, I guess.
You seem to let Scorsese hopscotch back and forth between narrative features and documentaries, so
Sure.
no problem.
Just like Scorsese.
Sir.
Just first of all, love your work and very excited to get these seats in the front row. By the way, we're the last ones to sell, but it was the best spot here.
I'm just so sad. It's so full.
Yeah, so this was a sellout, so this is great. Question is, you're doing a lot of these documentaries, as mentioned, about friends of yours, right? Or people that you have a relationship. When do they see the cut? When do they see the final work? And how do you sort of measure whether they like it or not?
That is always a moment. I mean, I don't dwell on it much. Of course, at some point you know that it's coming. But I think we trust ourselves. I remember when we first showed Alex Free Solo, he was kind of quiet, and we were like, it's not like we're stressing, but of course you're curious. And he just turned around and said, "It's very honest." And we were like, that's a huge compliment coming from Alex, because he's normally like, yeah. But I can't remember, when did I show Chris? Yes. I think it's really difficult to be, we call them participants, subjects, but participants of a film about you. I mean, I don't think it's hard to kind of wrap your head around, but I don't know if you can really appreciate like having a team of people, like a pretty good sized team by the end of the project, just with a scalpel, like taking apart your life and putting it on screen, and then putting it on screens, and then putting it on a streamer, and all these people are going to see it. I mean, it's kind of a terrifying thought, and it's hard, and oftentimes, it takes a moment to kind of absorb it, and you don't expect, nobody's jumping up and down in their seats. That was amazing, because but it's intense.
Yes, in the back.
Hey, I really loved it, and I've loved all your work. Going back to some of your previous works, including this one, at what point in the process, I know with Free Solo you hopped on and filming relatively early, The Rescue was after the fact, and this one a little bit more in the middle. What stands out to you about these stories and tells you I need to start filming, the passing, when you start doing animations, when you kind of decide this is a story worthwhile devoting all of our time and energy into producing to go for one documentary?
So the question is, kind of, when do you decide that you're kind of making a movie, and what does that process look like? And I would say that it's varied over the years, but like when I started, a lot of the footage that you see in Meru I shot before I ever conceived of making a movie, and it wasn't until after 2011 when we came back from our second trip to Connor's third trip to Meru that I decided I wanted to make this movie. And it was because I had something to say. I remember thinking, okay, and you never know what it is, but some of it was just people being like, why would you ever do this? And I just wanted to answer that question for people, because it just seemed, people just thought it was this kind of binary thing, and it's not. It's like, it's not just about the climbing or the craft of climbing. A lot of it is, but so much of it is about friendship and mentorship and legacy, and there's a lot of different motivations behind it. And of course, trying to ultimately answer the question of why, right? And I felt like I wanted to share a more nuanced idea of what compels people to do this. And it's not just about getting to the summit of something at all, you know. But I kind of started, went backwards on that one. Free Solo, we started from the beginning of when Alex really started putting an effort towards free soloing on cap, get the film financed. That's kind of one way. The Rescue, this is an event that happened. That film is almost made entirely of archival. It was one of the most intense archival projects we've ever done. This one would have been if we hadn't made The Rescue. I mean, that project was really, really wild in terms of how intense it was building that film. I mean, obviously we shot some reenactments, and then this film was kind of in the middle of that. I knew that there was this incredible story. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be. And I just started filming on instinct, and going back there and filming until the story started to reveal itself. And then it wasn't until I think when I started to see that these parts were actually going to happen, that I really started to push in filming, because I knew there was going to be an arc there.
Okay, so we apparently have to wrap up here, which is unfortunate because we have a great, highly engaged audience. But wildlife, Jimmy Chin?
Yeah.